The Resolute hovered above Glacia like a bloated tick, its engines rumbling a low, disgruntled protest against the cold monotony of space. Captain Draxon, a man whose face looked like it had been carved from the same grizzled rock as his heart, stood on the bridge, surveying the icy expanse below. "Well, if this isn't the perfect vacation spot," he grumbled, scratching at a scar that zigzagged across his chin like some forgotten road map. Mira Cordell, the ship's lead scientist, was hunched over a console, fingers flying over the controls like caffeinated spiders. Her hair, a wild tangle of copper, looked like it had declared independence from the rest of her. "Cheer up, Draxon. It's not every day you get to warm up a planet. Think of it as a giant ice cube. We're just the over-enthusiastic cocktail shakers," she said, her voice dripping with sarcastic cheer. "Yeah, well, let's hope the martini at the end of this doesn't taste like regret," Draxon retorted, his eyes scanning the data streams pouring in. The planet was a frozen ball of misery, its oceans locked in perpetual frost. Ideal for penguins, maybe, but humans needed something a bit toastier. Mira's eyes narrowed, focusing on a particularly ornery blip. "Hold on a second, Captain. I'm getting something weird. Weird how? Like your uncle's dance moves at a wedding, or weird like we're about to be screwed in a way that's not even enjoyable, closer to the latter. Look at this." She tapped a few keys and a series of signals popped up, dancing erratically across the screen. Draxon leaned in, his eyes narrowing to suspicious slits. "Signals from a collapsing wormhole. That's just fantastic. As if we didn't have enough on our icy plate. Yup. Could cut us off from Earth. Think of it as a cosmic don't call us, we won't call you situation." Mira smirked, though the humor didn't reach her eyes. "Great. So we're potentially stranded on a planet where the most exciting thing is watching ice thaw. Just like home." Draxon leaned back in his chair, the synthetic leather creaking under his weight. Mira nodded, her expression serious. "We need to figure out if this collapse is imminent. If it is, we might be the only humans in the universe who'll get frostbite in space." "Way to put a positive spin on it," Draxon said, his tone dry as a Martian dust storm. "All right, let's get a team together. We'll need to run some diagnostics, and maybe find out if we can survive here if Earth decides to hang up on us, team." "You mean more than just your charming self and my brilliant brain?" Mira shot him a grin. "Yeah. Well, I figured we could use some meat shields in case something decides to bite back." They gathered a motley crew of engineers, scientists, and one disgruntled cook who'd been roped in purely for his ability to complain about everything, from the quality of the coffee to the lack of decent entertainment. As they headed down to the planet's surface, the Resolute's shuttle shuddered and groaned, each turbulence a reminder of the universe's indifference. The entry was rough, like riding a shopping cart down a gravel hill, but they made it with all limbs and sarcasm intact. Glacia's surface was a study in existential bleakness. Ice stretched to the horizon, broken only by jagged outcroppings of rock that thrust up like forgotten tombstones. The wind howled its lonely tune, a reminder that nature's playlist was anything but soothing. "Damn, it's colder than my ex-girlfriend's heart out here," muttered Jenkins, one of the engineers, stomping his feet to keep warm. "If we find a hot spring, I vote Jenkins jumps in first," Mira said, her breath fogging in the frigid air. "Don't tempt me, Doc," Jenkins shot back, pulling his parka tighter. They trudged across the icy wasteland, instruments beeping and blinking uselessly, as if mocking their quest for warmth in a place that clearly had no intention of accommodating such human frivolities. Suddenly, a high-pitched whine sliced through the wind, followed by a series of deep rumbles beneath their feet. Draxon swore, reaching for the radio. "Resolute, this is Draxon. You getting this?" The static was their only response, a white noise symphony that screamed you're on your own. "Well, either we just discovered the world's worst DJ or something's not happy we're here," Mira said, checking her equipment. "Yeah, well, if it's angry, it can take a number. I'm not in the mood for a cosmic ass-kicking right now," Draxon replied, scanning the horizon for signs of life, or more likely, death. Their equipment finally picked up some semblance of a signal, a weak, erratic pulse that seemed to originate from somewhere deep within the ice. "Looks like it's coming from down there," Jenkins pointed to a massive fissure, its maw gaping wide like it was ready to swallow them whole. "Of course it is," Mira sighed. "Nothing can ever be easy, can it? Did you sign up for easy?" "Because I sure as hell didn't see that in the job description," Draxon said, motioning for them to proceed. They descended into the crevasse with the elegance of hippos trying to figure skate, ropes and gear jangling like a chaotic orchestra. The air grew colder, if that was even possible, and the only sound was the crunch of snow underfoot and their own labored breathing. "You know, this would be a great time for an existential crisis," Jenkins said, peering into the icy depths. "I mean, who needs therapy when you've got the potential for imminent doom to keep you grounded?" "I'll drink to that," Mira replied, shaking her head. "Preferably something strong enough to melt my insides." They reached a cavern, its walls shimmering with an eerie luminescence that could have been beautiful if not for the fact that it was likely radioactive or worse. In the center, a console of unknown origin blinked at them, its lights pulsing like the heartbeat of some forgotten god. "Well, isn't this a pretty little mystery?" Draxon said, approaching with caution. "Anyone else feel like we're about to star in the kind of horror movie where everyone dies and no one remembers their names?" "Don't be so pessimistic," Captain Mira said, though her fingers were checking her blaster just in case. "Maybe it's just a friendly alien beacon asking for directions. Or it's the on switch for something that's gonna eat us alive," Jenkins muttered, eyeing the console with suspicion. As they debated whether to press the button or run for their lives, the console emitted a shrill beep, and the canyon started to tremble. Chunks of ice fell around them like nature's own disco ball gone wrong. "Well, that's definitely not a good sign," Mira said, backing away. Draxon reached for his radio again, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Resolute, come in. We're gonna need a lift, preferably one that doesn't involve being crushed by nature's least friendly popsicle." More static greeted him, almost as if the cosmos itself had decided to play hard to get. "Looks like we're not getting out of here unless we figure out how to make this thing give us a lift," Mira said, pointing at the console. "And if it doesn't, then I hope you brought your thermal underwear, Captain, because we're in for a long, cold wait." The console beeped again, this time in a pattern that seemed almost musical, like some alien was trying to communicate through the power of a bad pop song. "Maybe it just wants to dance," Jenkins suggested, though his grin was more grimace. "Or maybe it's warming up to blow us to kingdom come," Draxon replied, eyes narrowing. "Either way, let's see what happens when we push its buttons." With a nod, Mira stepped forward, her hands hovering over the console like a gambler on a losing streak. "Here's to hoping this doesn't end in spectacular failure," she said, pressing a button. The lights on the console flared, and for a moment the cavern seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a suddenness that was almost comical, the tremors stopped, and a path of light illuminated a corridor leading deeper underground. "Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've just been invited to the universe's least exclusive after-party," Draxon said, striding forward. "Do we have to accept?" Jenkins asked, though he followed, albeit with the reluctance of a man heading to the gallows. "Only if we want to get out of here," Mira replied. "And I'd rather not become a permanent ice sculpture." They moved down the corridor, the glow guiding them like moths to a flame they half expected to be lethal. At the end, a vast chamber opened up, filled with machinery that looked more at home in a mad scientist's fever dream than under a frozen ocean. "Well, I'll be damned," Draxon muttered, staring at the contraptions. "Looks like we stumbled onto someone's secret lab," Mira said, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Or the set of the worst sci-fi film ever," Jenkins added. The machinery hummed with a low, almost soothing vibration, and in the center, a holographic display flickered to life, words scrolling in a language none of them recognized. "Is it just me, Or is that thing speaking in tongues? Draxon asked, squinting at the display. Definitely one for the mystery books, Mira replied, trying to make sense of the symbols. Well, if it wants to kill us, at least it's being polite about it, Jenkins said, the sarcasm a thin veil over his unease. Draxon approached the display, his hand hovering above it uncertainly. I guess there's only one way to find out what this thing wants. You mean aside from our inevitable demise? Mira quipped, though she was close by, ready to lend her expertise or her blaster, if need be. With a sigh that spoke of resignation more than hope, Draxon touched the display. It flared to life, the symbols rearranging themselves into something almost intelligible. Welcome, intruders, a voice intoned, echoing in the cavern like the ghost of a long-dead emperor. Prepare to be tested. Well, that's ominous, Jenkins said, backing away slightly. Yeah, and I thought pop quizzes were bad in school, Mira added, though her fingers were already working to decipher the challenge ahead. As the chamber sealed itself with a thundering finality, Draxon couldn't help but chuckle darkly. Guess we just RSVP'd to the wrong damn party. The machinery hummed louder, and with a wry smile, he muttered to the universe at large, let's see if we can't crash it. The Resolute hovered above Glacia, its engines purring like a cat with a sinister secret. Inside, the situation was about as stable as a politician's promise. Draxon fiddled with the comms panel, the static his only companion in this cosmic symphony of disappointment. Earth, this is the Resolute. If you can hear us, blink twice, he muttered, his sarcasm a flimsy shield against the creeping dread. Mira stood behind him, arms crossed, a picture of skepticism. You really think Earth's gonna call back? Last time I checked, cosmic love letters had better chances of getting delivered. Draxon shot her a grim smile. Well, I figured it was worth a shot. Maybe they're just screening their calls. Jenkins, an engineer with a knack for pessimism, sauntered over. Face it, Cap. We're the kids left behind at space camp and the bus ain't coming back. Thanks, Jenkins. Your optimism is as refreshing as a punch to the gut, Draxon replied, finally giving the panel a rest. Looks like that wormhole's doing a great impersonation of my ex's Wi-Fi, unreliable and prone to ghosting. Jenkins chuckled, but the humor didn't quite reach his eyes. What now? We stuck here making friends with ice cubes. Mira stepped forward, tossing her wild copper hair like she was preparing for battle of wits, if nothing else. We've got the terraforming gear, don't we? Draxon raised an eyebrow. You suggesting we turn Glacia into a tropical paradise? I didn't pack my beach shorts. Not quite, Mira replied, her voice tinged with that special blend of sarcasm and genius that only she could manage. But we can warm up a patch, make it livable while we figure out how to get a signal through the intergalactic spam filter. The rest of the crew loitered nearby, eavesdropping with the subtlety of a herd of elephants in a china shop. Their faces were a mosaic of anxiety, resignation, and the kind of despair that could only come from realizing the last decent coffee in the universe was light years away. All right, Draxon said, standing straighter, the glint in his eyes suggesting he'd just come up with a half-baked plan, his specialty. Here's the deal, we focus on terraforming. Keep us alive, keep us busy, and maybe keep us from murdering each other in a fit of cabin fever, Jenkins snorted. And when the coffee runs out, we eat you first, Mira shot back without missing a beat. Lovely, Jenkins replied dryly. I always wanted to be the first human popsicle in space. With the plan, or semblance thereof, in place, they moved to the terraforming bay. The equipment hummed to life with a low drone, a symphony of machinery that promised salvation or disaster, depending on how generous the universe felt. Draxon eyed the crew, his grizzled face etched with the kind of resolve that one develops after years of staring down the barrel of cosmic calamity. Listen up, folks. We're gonna play God a little. Warm up this rock just enough to keep our extremities attached. Anyone got a problem with that? Silence, except for the rhythmic clatter of gears. Jenkins raised a hand. Yeah, just one. I'm not exactly thrilled about playing in the galactic sandbox without a manual. What if we melt the wrong thing and end up swimming instead? We'll cross that icy bridge when we come to it, Draxon replied, clapping him on the back. Besides, I've got a good feeling about this. You also had a good feeling about the last poker game, Mira pointed out. And we all know how that ended. Yeah, well, hope springs eternal, Draxon shot back. And for a moment, his grin was genuine if a bit weary. With the crew occupied by the mechanics of survival, the weight of their isolation pressed heavier, like a suffocating fog that settled over everything. Conversations were peppered with dark humor, the kind that danced on the edge of hysteria but kept them grounded sane. Mira found herself next to the disgruntled cook, Ramirez, who was currently engaged in a one-man crusade to make MRE taste like anything but cardboard. "Got any gourmet dish ideas?" she asked, peering over his shoulder at the mess of ingredients. "Sure, if you like your food with a side of sarcasm and desperation," Ramirez grumbled, stirring something that might generously be called stew. "I'm thinking of calling this one Desolation Delight." "Catchy," Mira said, her smile a thin line. "And if we get out of this, I'll make sure you get a spot on Celebrity Chef." He snorted. "Only if it comes with hazard pay." Meanwhile, Draxon was corralling the engineers into some semblance of order. "All right, gents, let's make this patch of ice the hottest spot in the galaxy." "Without setting it on fire," Jenkins added, ever the voice of caution. "Fire and ice, Jenkins. They go together like nothing good, but you see where I'm going." They worked until their fingers were numb, which didn't take long given the temperature, and the air was ripe with the scent of burnt circuits and determination. The machinery groaned under the strain, but bit by bit, the temperature climbed, a degree here, a degree there, until the frost began to retreat like a sulking teenager. "Would you look at that?" Mira breathed, watching the ice recede. "It's almost enough to make you believe in miracles." "Almost," Draxon agreed, though his eyes were scanning the horizon, the weight of command never far from his thoughts. With the immediate crisis abated, they retreated to the Resolute's cramped common area, the closest thing they had to a sanctuary. The atmosphere was lighter, though shadows lingered, whispers of what if echoing in the quiet spaces between their banter. Jenkins flopped into a chair, his expression somewhere between exhaustion and reluctant amusement. "So, what's next, Cap? We start a tourism business down there." "Visit scenic Glacia, come for the ice, stay because you're stranded." "Not a bad idea," Draxon replied, pouring himself a cup of the universe's most mediocre coffee. "Could be our retirement plan." Ramirez looked up from his culinary concoctions, his expression dour as ever. "If we survive this, I'm writing a book." Working title, 1001 Ways to Cook with Despair. "Put me down for a copy," Mira said, raising her mug in a mock toast. "It'll be the best seller of the century." They laughed, a sound that was more cathartic than joyous, but it did the job, patching the cracks that threatened to shatter their tenuous camaraderie. And as the laughter faded, replaced by the gentle hum of the ship and the distant whisper of stars, Draxon leaned back, his gaze fixed on the view outside. "We'll make it," he said, more to himself than the others. "One way or another, we'll find a way back." Mira leaned against the bulkhead, her expression softer than usual. "And if not," Draxon met her eyes, his own filled with the fire of a man who refused to be extinguished. "Then we make the best damn life we can right here, even if it means building a snowman army to stave off the madness." Jenkins snorted. "Well, if we're recruiting, count me in as head of the snowman cavalry. Just as long as they follow orders and don't overthrow the captain," Draxon replied, his tone mock serious. "Mutiny by snowmen. Now there's a headline," Mira chuckled, though her mind was still calculating probabilities and contingencies, never quite resting. As the lights dimmed for the ship's artificial night, the crew settled into an uneasy peace. Outside, the universe stretched endlessly, a vast theater of possibility and peril, indifferent to the struggles of a handful of humans clinging to life on a frozen world. The wormhole's collapse had severed their lifeline, but the crew of the Resolute was nothing if not resilient, armed with sarcasm and stubbornness in equal measure. And as the stars watched, cold and eternal, they dug in, determined to survive, to thrive, and perhaps, just maybe, to find a way home. But for now, survival was a victory in itself, a testament not to the machinery that hummed around them, but to the indomitable spirit of those who refused to be forgotten by a galaxy that had already moved on. The Resolute's engines groaned against the encroaching cold like an old man with arthritis. Draxon leaned against the control panel, his eyes skimming over flickering lights that seemed to mock their predicament. If the universe had a sense of humor, it was the kind that enjoyed watching people stumble in the dark. "Captain," Jenkins called from across the cluttered room, his voice dripping with the enthusiasm of a sloth on sedatives. "Got some good news and bad news." "Hit me with the bad first," Draxon replied, waving a hand like he was swatting at invisible flies of misfortune. "Bad news is, the temperature's dropping faster than a politician's approval rating after a scandal," Jenkins said, rubbing a grease-stained hand across his forehead. "Good news is, I've got an extra pair of thermal socks." "Always the silver lining, Jenkins," Draxon replied. "Remind me to promote you to Chief Officer of Unending Optimism." Mira wandered into the room, her hair a chaotic halo of copper that seemed to defy gravity or any semblance of order. She was clutching her console like it was a lifeline, a grim expression etched onto her face. "What's eating you, Mira?" Draxon asked, though he already suspected the answer wouldn't be rainbows and sunshine. "I've been running some scans. Glacia's not just cold, it's unstable," she said, her voice as dry as the ship's coffee reserves. "The core's about as solid as a politician's promise." Draxon's face fell. Meaning, if we push the terraforming too hard, this place might throw a tantrum. And by tantrum, I mean catastrophic quakes. Think of it as Mother Nature's way of saying, get off my lawn. "Just perfect," Jenkins muttered. "So, we're stuck between freezing to death or getting swallowed by the ground. Love those odds." "Typical," Draxon said, his wry grin returning. "The universe decided it needed a good laugh at our expense." Mira plopped down on a nearby crate, her console resting on her knees. "I'm starting to wonder if we pissed off some cosmic deity in a past life." "The way I see it," Draxon said, pacing back and forth like a caged tiger, "we need to figure out how to keep from turning into popsicles while making sure Glacia doesn't give us a one-way ticket to its core." "Just another day in paradise," Jenkins said, picking up a wrench as if contemplating whether it might double as a weapon. "What's the plan, Cap?" Draxon didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared out the viewport at the planet below, a vast, white expanse, beautiful in its own indifferent way, a reminder that the universe didn't give a damn about human struggles. "We've got to adjust the terraforming, slow it down, focus on small areas," Draxon finally said. "Keep ourselves warm without setting off planet-wide tectonic temper tantrums." "More ice, less fire, got it," Mira said, her fingers dancing over the console's keys. "But it's gonna be like threading a needle while blindfolded." "Better than the alternative," Draxon replied. "I'd rather we not become the next cautionary tale for future space explorers." "Assuming there are any left after us," Jenkins added helpfully. The small group moved into the engine room, a labyrinth of machinery and cables that were as cantankerous as the crew. Ramirez lingered nearby, his apron looking more like a battle-worn flag than kitchen attire. "Tried to whip up something warm," Ramirez offered, holding out a steaming cup of dubious liquid. "I call it hot desperation." Mira sniffed the concoction and raised an eyebrow. "You sure it's not desperation on fire?" "Close enough," Ramirez shrugged. "We can add dancing in the dark if it combusts." Draxon took a tentative sip, wincing as it burned its way down. "Listen, folks, I need everyone focused and functional. We've got to monitor the planet's seismic activity while we tweak the terraforming settings. I know it's a big ask, but we're screwed if we don't," Jenkins finished for him. "Got it," They set to work, a symphony of clanking tools and muttered curses as they adjusted the equipment, walked the tightrope between survival and sudden death. The air was thick with tension, punctuated by the occasional joke that bordered on hysteria. "Hey, Mira," Jenkins called from beneath a tangle of wires, "you ever think about writing a memoir? Life on the Edge, a tale of ice and idiocy." "Sure, Jenkins. As soon as I find a pen that doesn't freeze solid," Mira shot back, her eyes glued to the seismic readings. Draxon watched them, a flicker of pride stirring beneath his layers of cynicism. They were a ragtag crew, held together by sarcasm and sheer bloody-mindedness, but they were his ragtag crew. Eyes blurred together, the artificial daylight shifting to night while they worked tirelessly. There was no time for rest when the ground beneath their feet could turn traitor at any moment. Eventually, the ship's dim lights flickered into the evening cycle, casting long shadows that painted the walls with ghostly fingers. Draxon leaned over Mira's shoulder, peering at the console with bleary eyes. "How's it looking?" he asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. "Better, I think," Mira replied, her voice a mix of exhaustion and hope. "Readings are stabilizing. We might have convinced Glacia to play nice for a bit longer." "Good," Draxon said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We'll keep at it. Tomorrow's another day, another chance to outsmart this frozen hunk of rock." Jenkins stretched, his joints popping audibly. "And if we don't, then we party like it's the end of the world," Draxon replied. Which, let's face it, wouldn't be our first time. As the crew began to disperse, seeking whatever rest they could find, Draxon lingered by the viewport once more. The universe stretched beyond, vast and uncaring, a backdrop to their small, stubborn fight for survival. Mira joined him, her footsteps barely audible over the ship's hum. She leaned against the bulkhead, mirroring his stance. "You think we'll make it out of this one?" she asked, not quite meeting his eyes. A pause, then Draxon shrugged. "We've beat the odds before. Why not one more time?" Mira smiled, though it was tinged with all the uncertainty of their situation. "Here's hoping the universe is feeling generous. Or at least bored enough to let us slip by," Draxon said. "For now, we just keep going. One step at a time, one joke at a time. Until we either make it or laugh ourselves to death trying," he finished, a hint of mischief in his voice. They stood in silence for a moment, two figures against the vastness of space, clinging to humor as their lifeline. It was a fragile thing, but in the face of the unknown, it was all they had. As the artificial night deepened, the ship settled into an uneasy lull. Draxon finally turned away from the viewport, the weight of command pressing on his shoulders, yet somehow lighter than before. "All right," he said, clapping his hands together. "Let's get some shut-eye. Tomorrow's another day for heroics and half-baked plans. Or just more of the usual insanity," Mira added, stifling a yawn. "Wouldn't have it any other way," Draxon replied. And with that, they parted ways, leaving the ship to its nighttime vigil over the icy world below. The Resolute hummed quietly, a defiant presence against the encroaching dark, as if refusing to be silenced, no matter what the universe threw their way. In the quiet moments before sleep claimed them, each member of the crew held onto the absurdity of it all, finding comfort in dark jokes and the camaraderie of shared struggle. They were an unlikely family, bound together by circumstance and stubbornness, determined to survive against all odds. And as the ship drifted through the endless night, the stars kept watch, indifferent but constant, silent witnesses to the human spirit's unyielding fight against oblivion. The next day dawned with the ship's system simulating light, though anyone with a window knew better. Glacia wasn't letting up its icy grip anytime soon. The Resolute had seen better days, and so had its crew. Captain Draxon stood in the control room, rubbing sleep from his eyes with the elegance of a bear waking from hibernation. "All right, team," he began, trying to inject some semblance of enthusiasm into his voice. "We've got quakes rattling our bones and equipment that's about as reliable as a broken compass in a magnet storm. Let's get this show on the road. Another day in paradise," Jenkins muttered, tapping on a console that had given up on life somewhere between hello and goodbye. Does anyone else miss the days when our biggest problem was running out of coffee? Don't remind me, Mira groaned as she entered. Her hair resembling a copper storm had taken up residence on her head. She held her console with the air of someone cradling a bomb they weren't sure was live. I haven't had a caffeine buzz since I can't even remember. Maybe it's a sign we should take up healthier habits, Draxon suggested, his tone implying he'd rather take up bare-knuckle boxing with a Yeti. Jenkins snorted. Yeah, right. Maybe I'll start with yoga. After all, there's nothing more soothing than a downward dog while the ship tries to shake us off like fleas. Draxon nodded towards a digital map flickering on the wall. We've got equipment damaged in sectors 12 through 15. Mira, check out the core readings. See if we can tap into any energy sources without triggering an avalanche. On it, Mira said, though her suggested enthusiasm was in short supply. With a resigned groan, Jenkins grabbed his toolkit. Guess I'm working miracles today. Again. Miracles, Jenkins, are what we're all about, Draxon said, clapping him on the back with perhaps too much vigor. Remember, when life gives you lemons, you hurl them into space and hope they don't boomerang back, Jenkins finished. Got it, Cap. An hour later, Draxon, Jenkins, and a handful of other unlucky souls were trudging through the bowels of the Resolute. The corridor was dimly lit, the occasional spark from exposed wiring adding a strobe effect that could probably induce a seizure if you stared too long. Kind of reminds you of home, doesn't it? Draxon mused, kicking a loose bolt aside. If home was a dilapidated death trap hurtling through space. Ah, nostalgia, Jenkins said, hefting his toolkit. Warms the heart if not the toes. As they reached the first damaged sector, Jenkins knelt beside a panel that looked like it had taken a very personal dislike to being intact. Let's see what we're dealing with here. Draxon leaned over his shoulder. What's the verdict, Dr. Jenkins? Well, Captain, I'd say this patient needs a miracle cure, or a mercy killing, Jenkins replied, pulling apart the panel with the delicacy of a gorilla unwrapping a present. Meanwhile, Mira was in the science lab, her console humming with data that promised more headaches than solutions. She poked at the screen, trying to coax the numbers into telling her something useful about Glacia's core. All right, you cold-hearted brute, Mira mumbled to the planet's representation. Show me what you've got. A series of readings blinked into existence, each one more alarming than the last. Great, just great, she sighed, pressing a button to share the results with Draxon. This thing's about as stable as a toddler on roller skates. Draxon's voice crackled into life through her calm. Mira, you find us anything that might keep the lights on without setting off the fireworks of doom. Depends, she replied, eyeing the data with the same suspicion Jenkins reserved for shipboard coffee. The core's got energy, all right, enough to power us for a while. But tapping it might as well come with a do not disturb sign, unless we want to see just how far Glacia can throw us. Draxon made a noise that could have been either a grunt of acknowledgement or the start of a headache. Keep poking at it. See if there's any way to draw power without stirring up the hornet's nest. Will do, Mira said, though her expression suggested she was about as optimistic as a goldfish in a frying pan. Back in the corridor, Jenkins was elbow-deep in wiring. Okay, I've got it jerry-rigged enough to hold for now, he announced, wiping a smear of grease off his cheek. At least until the next quake sends us all to hell. Good work, Draxon said, patting him on the shoulder. You're a regular space Mac jiver. Thanks, Cap. I'll be sure to add that to my resume. Survived hellish conditions with nothing but duct tape and cursing. Speaking of hellish conditions, one of the other crew members piped up. Any word on when we might stop shaking like a maraca? Patience is a virtue, Jenkins replied smoothly. Also vastly overrated. As they moved to the next sector, the ship juddered violently beneath their feet, sending them scrambling for support. Damn it, Glacia, Draxon swore, steadying himself against the wall. We're trying to help you, you ungrateful rock. I think it heard you, Cap, Jenkins said, pushing himself upright. And I don't think it's in a forgiving mood. Just keep moving, Draxon ordered, though his voice held a note of weary acceptance. We've got a job to do. They pressed on, their banter a thin shield against the encroaching cold and creeping dread of their predicament. Back in the lab, Mira was growing increasingly frustrated with the console's refusal to spit out anything resembling a pleasant surprise. Yet the data remained stubbornly uncooperative, a digital middle finger to her best efforts. "Come on, you piece of junk," she growled, smacking the console. It responded with a non-committal beep as if to say, "Nice try." Deciding to take a different approach, Mira activated the ship's internal communications. "Draxon, you there?" "Right here, Mira," came the reply, his voice crackling slightly through the connection. "I've done some more digging," she said, "and there's a potential energy source deeper down. Problem is, tapping it without turning Glacia into a giant snow globe is about as likely as Jenkins taking up ice sculpture." "Hey," Jenkins' voice interrupted, "I happen to have a delicate touch." "Only if you're dismantling a pie," Mira shot back. Draxon cut through their banter. "So what's the play, Mira? We either play it safe and freeze our asses off, or we gamble on pissing off the planet with a tap. My guess, we might buy ourselves some breathing room if we're careful." "Careful, huh?" Draxon mused. "That's a new one for us." "Yeah, well, first time for everything," Mira said. "I'll keep monitoring the core. Maybe I'll spot a way to get the juice we need without sparking a geological tantrum." "Thanks, Mira. Keep me posted. And don't let Jenkins convince you to try his coffee experiments." Mira chuckled. "As if I'd tempt fate like that." By the time the crew had finished their repairs, the ship felt a smidgen more stable, but the unease lingered like a guest who couldn't take a hint. Draxon pulled his team back to the control room, the air heavy with unspoken what-ifs. "So," Jenkins said, flopping into a chair with the grace of a sandbag, "we've got a ship that's barely holding together, a planet with more mood swings than an interstellar soap opera, and an energy source that could send us all to whatever afterlife we subscribe to." "Pretty much sums it up," Draxon agreed, rubbing at the ever-present tension in his neck. "Hey, here's an idea," Mira said, entering the room and dropping into a chair. "Let's play a new game. It's called How Many Times Can We Cheat Death Before Breakfast?" "Sounds like a riot," Jenkins said. "I'll bring the snacks." "Snacks my ass," Ramirez interjected, wandering in with a tray of something that might have once been edible. "Here, have some, whatever this is." Mira eyed the offering with suspicion. "If it doesn't bite back, I'll consider it." The crew shared a laugh, the kind that edges a little too close to hysteria, but it was laughter nonetheless. In the quiet moments that followed, the weight of their reality settled back onto their shoulders. Draxon caught each of their gazes, seeking a spark of determination amid the exhaustion. "We've got this far," he said, the roughness in his voice underscoring his sincerity. "I know it's a mess, and I know the universe seems hell-bent on squashing us flat, but we'll keep pushing forward, together." "Together," Mira echoed, her voice steadier than before. "Together," Jenkins agreed, raising a wrench in a mock salute. "Even if it kills us," Ramirez added, his smile forced but genuine. And so, with grim determination and a shared sense of irreverent camaraderie, the crew of the Resolute prepared for the next battle, ready to face whatever fresh hell the frozen world below might throw their way. They were survivors, after all, and no amount of cosmic bad luck was going to change that. The Resolute shuddered once again, and Draxon had the distinct impression that the ship was attempting to audition for a space-themed horror movie, complete with bone-rattling sound effects. Somewhere in the chaos, a console exploded in a shower of sparks, which, while pretty, was definitely not reassuring. "Looks like Glacia's having a tantrum," Jenkins muttered, his voice barely audible over the alarm klaxon blaring through the ship. "I knew this job was gonna be a pain, but I didn't expect the planet to literally try and kill us." Draxon grunted, wrestling with the controls as if sheer force of will could stabilize their orbit. "Just another day at the office," he said, though his knuckles were whitening with the effort. Mira, who had been clinging to her chair like it was her last lifeline, glanced at the readouts. "Captain, the outpost is toast. Sensors show it's collapsing like a souffle in a thunderstorm. Can't we get a break around here?" Jenkins asked, throwing his hands up in exasperation. "We might as well be wearing kick-me signs for the universe." "Focus," Draxon ordered, though he couldn't help but feel a pang of agreement. If the cosmos had a sense of humor, it was a particularly cruel one. He punched a button on his console, opening a channel to the rest of the crew. "All hands brace for impact. We're about to hit some serious turbulence. Secure anything that isn't nailed down, and if it is nailed down, consider adding extra nails." The ship rocked violently once more, and Draxon could almost hear Glacia laughing at their plight. The outpost they had poured sweat and questionable rations into was nothing more than debris now, scattered across the icy landscape like confetti at the world's worst party. They scrambled to assess the damage, which was about as easy as counting the raindrops in a monsoon. Mira was furiously tapping at her console, trying to pull up any useful data. "I've got a partial feed," she announced. "Looks like some of the crew are holed up in Sector 9, but we've got others scattered across Sectors 7 and 8. Communications are spotty at best." "Of course they are," Jenkins said dryly. "It wouldn't be a proper disaster without us being blind and deaf." Draxon sighed, his patience wearing thinner than a cheap spacesuit. "All right, we need to get boots on the ground. Mira, you're with me. Jenkins, you stay here and try to coax the comms into working." "Great," Jenkins muttered to himself. "Stuck babysitting a bunch of wires while everyone else gets to play in the snow." Mira shot him a look. "Oh, don't worry, Jenkins. I'm sure the frostbite will be just as thrilling as you'd imagine." She and Draxon grabbed their gear, donning the closest thing they had to winter wear, which was essentially just their standard uniforms with extra insulation. They might as well have been wearing paper. The airlock hissed open, and the cold hit them like a slap to the face, a particularly aggressive slap from a particularly angry glacier. "Lovely weather we're having," Draxon quipped, pulling his scarf tighter around his neck. "Perfect for a stroll," Mira replied, her teeth already chattering. Stepping out onto the frozen wasteland that was Glacia, they navigated by the scant light of their helmet lamps, the landscape a desolate expanse of white and shadow. Somewhere out there were their crewmates, huddled against the cold and the dark. They trudged on, each step a battle against the elements. Draxon kept an eye on his handheld scanner, which was behaving as if it had a vendetta against providing accurate information. According to this, we're either right on top of them or they are a mile underground. "Useful," Mira said, adjusting her grip on her equipment pack. "Next time, let's bring a compass. Or a psychic." They pushed forward, the wind howling in their ears like an angry banshee. Draxon could almost imagine it whispering dire promises of their imminent demise. As they neared the coordinates, a series of shapes loomed out of the snow, tents, hastily erected shelters, and the huddled forms of their crew. It was a scene straight out of a disaster movie, and not the kind with a happy ending. Draxon recognized Ramirez, who was valiantly trying to start a fire with what looked like a collection of twigs and a grim determination that was almost inspiring. "Captain," Ramirez called, standing up and saluting with one hand while the other clutched a questionable bundle of kindling. "At ease, Ramirez," Draxon said, his words puffing out in clouds of mist. "How are we looking?" "Like a bunch of snowmen on a diet," Ramirez replied, his grin as sharp as the wind. "We've got some of the crew here, but the rest are still unaccounted for. We could use some good news." "I'll see what I can do," Draxon said, though optimism felt like a distant memory. Mira moved through the camp, checking on the others. "Everyone holding up?" she asked, her voice a mix of concern and practicality. "As well as can be expected," one of the crew members replied, shivering beneath a thermal blanket. "Which is to say, not at all." "Great," Mira said, though her eyes betrayed her empathy. "Just hang tight, we'll get through this." Draxon surveyed the scene, his thoughts racing. They were cut off, their resources dwindling, and the planet seemed intent on making their lives as difficult as possible. It was, in a word, bleak. "We've got to regroup," he said, addressing the crew. Get everyone we can back to the ship. We can't survive out here for long. A murmur of agreement swept through the group, though their faces were etched with uncertainty. Draxon could feel the weight of their trust and the enormity of the task ahead. Back on the Resolute, Jenkins was wrestling with the communication system as if it were a particularly stubborn car engine. "Come on, you piece of junk," he muttered, slamming a fist against the console. "Work with me here." A sputter of static answered him, followed by a burst of garbled audio. He twisted a dial and the noise resolved into a voice Mira's, cutting through the white noise like a lifeline. "Jenkins, you there?" "Loud and clear," he replied, a grin sneaking onto his face. "What's your status?" "Freezing our asses off, but alive," Mira said, her tone half joking, half serious. "We've got some of the crew accounted for, but we're missing a few. Need you to try and pinpoint their signals." "On it," Jenkins said, fingers flying over the controls. "I'll do my best to play hide and seek with this damn thing." "Wouldn't expect anything less," Mira replied before the line cut out with a crackle. Jenkins focused, coaxing the reluctant system to cooperate. The screens before him flickered with data, a patchwork of readings that hinted at their missing crew's locations. It was a start. Out in the snow, Draxon and Mira had set up a makeshift command post, their gear spread out like a survivalist's dream and a bureaucrat's nightmare. The cold bit at their fingertips even through their gloves, a reminder that time was not on their side. "We need to move fast," Mira said, her breath misting in the air, "before the next quake decides to bury us." "Agreed," Draxon replied, his eyes scanning the horizon. Glacia's not exactly rolling out the welcome mat. They organized the crew into teams, each with a clear objective: salvage what they could from the destroyed outposts, locate the missing, and find their way back to the ship. Not exactly a walk in the park, but necessity had a way of making even the impossible seem routine. "All right, people," Draxon called, his voice carrying over the wind. "We're heading out. Stay sharp and stick together. We'll make it through this one step at a time." "One frozen, miserable step at a time," Mira added, securing her pack. The crew nodded, grim but determined. They had come too far to let the universe's worst vacation spot get the better of them. The trek began, a parade of weary souls trudging through the snow, the distant silhouette of the Resolute just visible on the horizon. The ship stood as a beacon of hope, or at least, a promise of shelter. They moved quickly, the urgency of their mission cutting through the fatigue. Mira kept an eye on her scanner, calling out coordinates and updates. Draxon led the way, his mind focused solely on getting his people home. Every step was a challenge, the icy ground shifting unpredictably beneath them, the wind a constant adversary. But they pressed on, driven by necessity and a stubborn refusal to admit defeat. As they reached the scattered remains of another outpost, they found signs of their missing crew, footprints in the snow, equipment half buried beneath the drifts. There was hope yet. "Draxon," Mira said, pointing towards a faint glow in the distance. "That might be them." He nodded, signaling the group to follow. They moved cautiously, the snow crunching beneath their boots, the glow growing brighter with each step. Finally, they reached the source, a small camp hastily assembled with a handful of crew huddled around a makeshift heater. Relief washed over them, a wave of warmth in the frozen wasteland. "Draxon," one of the crew exclaimed, rising to greet them. "We thought we were finished." "Not yet," Draxon replied, a rare smile breaking through his grim demeanor. "We're getting out of here, all of us." Mira began checking on the newly found crew, her efficiency matched only by her empathy. "Let's get you sorted," she said, offering a spare blanket. "We need to move fast." With everyone accounted for, the trek back to the Resolute was a race against time. The planet trembled beneath them, each rumble a reminder of their precarious situation. But they moved as one, a unified force against the odds. The ship loomed closer, a promise of safety and a testament to their resilience. As they crossed the final stretch, Draxon felt a surge of pride for his crew, scrappy, sarcastic, and stubborn as hell. They were the best, even when the universe seemed determined to prove otherwise. They reached the airlock, stumbling inside with a collective sigh of relief. The warmth enveloped them, a balm for their frozen bones. Once inside, the mood was jubilant, despite the lingering threat of disaster. They had survived, and that was reason enough to celebrate. Jenkins greeted them with a smirk, leaning casually against the wall. "Welcome back to paradise," he said. "How was your little adventure?" "Cold," Draxon replied, shaking the snow from his boots. "But successful." "Glad to hear it," Jenkins said with a nod. "Now let's see if we can keep this rust bucket flying." The crew dispersed, each member eager to get warm, to rest, to regroup. Draxon watched them go, his heart swelling with gratitude and resolve. They had faced the worst Glacia could throw at them and emerged stronger for it. There would be more challenges ahead, more fights to be won, but for now they had a moment of peace. Draxon looked at Mira, who was sipping a steaming mug of what passed for coffee. She caught his eye and raised the mug in a silent toast. "To survival," she said, a wry smile playing on her lips. "To survival," Draxon echoed, leaning back against the wall with a weary chuckle. And so, with their spirits lifted and their resolve renewed, the crew of the Resolute prepared to face whatever fresh hell the universe had in store, united in their determination to endure and defy the odds. The Resolute's dimly lit control room buzzed with the kind of frenetic energy that only impending doom could muster. Captain Draxon stood in front of the main console, massaging his temples as if that would somehow coax the elusive muse of good ideas to appear. Jenkins, still wrestling with the ship's notoriously fickle communications system, chimed in. "You know, if I hit this thing any harder, it'll file for workers' comp." Draxon grunted. At least it'd be doing something useful for a change. Mira Cordell was hunched over her console, fingers dancing across the keys with the kind of frantic grace usually reserved for auctioneers on speed. Her wild copper hair seemed to crackle with its own electricity, and surprisingly, the console hadn't exploded in a shower of sparks yet today. Small mercies. "We need a miracle, folks," Draxon said, his voice a mix of command and exasperation. "Or at least a temporary reprieve from Glacia's continuous attempts to murder us." "Good luck with that," Jenkins muttered, giving the console a final smack for good measure. "Hey, Captain," Mira called out, her eyes glued to the screen. "I've got something." Draxon turned, and the hope that flickered in his eyes was almost enough to power the ship itself. "A miracle, more like a half-baked plan that might not kill us instantly," Mira replied. "But it's something. I'm all ears." Mira tapped a few keys, and the main screen sprung to life with a digital map of Glacia. "There's a vent," she said, pointing to a pulsing red dot. "A natural geothermal vent. It's spewing out enough heat and energy to power a small city. Or warm up this icebox of a planet," Draxon asked. "Exactly. If we can adapt our converters to tap into it, we might just buy ourselves some time." Jenkins crossed his arms, skepticism plastered across his face. "You think that'll work, or is this just another of Glacia's death traps in disguise?" Mira smirked. "Given our track record, I'm betting on death trap, but it's our best shot." Draxon nodded, a plan starting to form in the chaos of his mind. "All right, we'll need a team to head out and retrofit the gear. Jenkins, get the converters prepped. Mira, you'll lead the field team." Mira gave a mock salute. "On it, Captain." "Let's hope this place doesn't decide to swallow us whole before we get there." With that, the crew sprang into action. Draxon watched them go, the familiar weight of leadership pressing down on his shoulders. It was a comforting pressure, like an old enemy you've learned to live with because it keeps you sharp. The snow was relentless, a white veil that obscured everything beyond a few feet. Mira led the way, her breath misting out in short, sharp bursts. Behind her, two other crew members trudged along, the wind biting at them like an angry chihuahua. "You know," Mira said, her voice loud over the howl of the wind, "I never thought I'd miss the ship's defective heating system." "Better than freezing your ass off out here," one of the crew members, a burly guy named Ralston, replied. "At least the ship doesn't actively try to kill us." "Debatable," Mira shot back, sidestepping a particularly treacherous patch of ice. Remember that time the airlock decided to play will it open or won't it roulette? Ralston grunted, conceding the point. The trek to the geothermal vent was a grim reminder that the universe had a sick sense of humor. They stumbled over snowdrifts taller than Jenkins' ego and dodged chunks of ice that had broken free from the cliffs above, like the world's worst obstacle course. But eventually, they made it. The vent was a steaming maw in the ground, belching out heat like a dragon with indigestion. Mira studied it, her mind already running through the schematics of what they'd need to do. "Looks like Glacia's gift wrapping isn't completely useless," she said, pulling a converter from her pack. "Let's hope these relics are more reliable than our navigational systems." Ralston nodded, beginning the work of setting up the converters. "Just once, I'd like something to go smoothly." "Where's the fun in that?" Mira replied, her hands deftly connecting cables and adjusting settings. "Adventure, peril, and the constant threat of icy death. Truly, we're living the dream." They worked in silence for a while, the cold biting through their gloves as they installed the converters. Mira's breath was a constant plume in the air, but she focused on the task at hand, refusing to think about all the ways this could fail. "How's it going?" Ralston asked after a while, his voice tinged with the hope of someone clinging to frayed optimism. "It's a work in progress," Mira replied, tightening a bolt. "But if we can get this rigged up, we might just have a fighting chance." The converters hummed to life, a tentative promise of power and warmth. Mira stepped back, admiring their handiwork. "Let's hope Glacia doesn't have a say in the matter," Ralston grinned, the expression a rare sight in their current predicament. "I'll take that as a win." They stayed for a few more minutes, ensuring everything was secure before packing up and heading back to the Resolute. The trek back was as miserable as the journey out, but Mira felt a flicker of hope warming her insides. Back aboard the Resolute, Jenkins was hunched over a console, fiddling with the readings from the geothermal vent. Draxon hovered nearby, his expression a mix of impatience and concern. "Give me good news, Jenkins," Draxon said, rubbing his hands together as if he could conjure warmth through sheer force of will. "The converters are online," Jenkins replied, his voice tinged with surprise as if he couldn't quite believe it himself. "We're getting usable energy, enough to keep the ship powered and maybe even warm up a section of Glacia." Draxon let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "That's something." "How long do you think it'll last?" Jenkins shrugged, an impressively nonchalant gesture for someone who was a hair's breadth away from freezing. "Until something breaks, which, given our luck, should be any minute now." Draxon chuckled despite himself. "Then let's make the most of it while we can." The crew gathered in the control room, a ragtag assembly of weary faces and mismatched gear. Mira stood to one side, her eyes fixed on the console's readings, a slight smile tugging at her lips. "We've got power," she announced, her voice cutting through the tension. "And it looks like we might be able to stabilize the surrounding area, make it a bit more livable." A murmur of relief and cautious optimism rippled through the room. Draxon felt it too, a strange sensation that he might have identified as hope if he weren't so out of practice with the concept. "All right," he said, his voice firm. "We've got a chance here, let's not screw it up." Mira crossed her arms, a wry grin on her face. "Famous last words, Captain." "Optimism is a dangerous game," Jenkins added, leaning back in his chair. "But it beats freezing to death." The room settled into a comfortable silence, the tension replaced by the quiet hum of the ship and the distant rumble of Glacia's winds. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, there was a sense that they might just make it through this mess. Draxon surveyed his crew, feeling a surge of pride and gratitude. They were scrappy, irreverent, and damn near impossible to kill. The universe had thrown its worst at them, and here they were, still standing. "To survival," he said, echoing Mira's earlier sentiment. The crew raised their imaginary glasses in a toast, their grins as bright as the stars beyond the ship's hull. And so they carried on, united by their shared defiance in the face of overwhelming odds. The universe might have been a harsh and unforgiving place, but for now they had each other, and a flicker of hope to keep them warm. In the grand tapestry, no, scratch that, in the grand dirt-streaked mural of life aboard the Resolute, this moment of triumph was a small but significant victory. And if victory came with a side of dark humor and stubborn resilience, well, then it was all the sweeter. The Resolute might have been a rust bucket, and Glacia might have been the universe's least hospitable tourist destination, but they were still here, still fighting, still laughing in the face of cosmic absurdity. And that was something worth clinging to, even in the darkest of times. The Resolute's control room was alive with the nervous energy of a crew teetering on the edge of survival. The geothermal converters had given them a shot at stabilizing Glacia, but optimism had a way of siring faster than milk in a microwave. Draxon, ever the dependable pessimist, loomed over the console like a gargoyle with a bad attitude. "Time to finish what we started," he declared, though his voice lacked the conviction of a man with a surefire plan. Mira was at her usual station, fingers a blur over the keys. "You mean time to roll the dice and see if we don't all end up as popsicles," she replied, not looking up. "Exactly," Draxon shot back, a hint of grim amusement dancing in his eyes. "Let's get this terraforming show on the road." Jenkins, still fiddling with the communication setup, muttered something about the joys of gambling with one's life. "Nothing like the sweet thrill of near-certain doom," he said dryly, adjusting a particularly stubborn dial. "Hey, if you can think of a better way to warm up a planet, I'm all ears," Mira said, the sarcasm in her voice as thick as Glacia's ice crust. "Maybe throw a giant blanket over it," Ralston suggested, his tone suggesting he was only half joking. "Sure," Jenkins replied. "Let me just nip back to Earth and pick one up." Draxon ignored the banter, his focus on the digital map that displayed the status of the converters. The geothermal vent was doing its job, pumping heat into the planet like a cosmic furnace. But it was a delicate balance, like walking a tightrope over a pit of lava and hoping you didn't look too tasty to the carnivorous plants below. "Okay, team," Draxon said, his voice cutting through the sarcasm like a knife through, well, thin ice. "We've got the converters online, but we need to make sure the terraforming gear is set to stabilize the environment without turning Glacia into a quivering mass of tectonic rage." "Got it," Mira said, checking her readouts. "We'll need to adjust the output ever so slightly. Like diffusing a bomb with a toothpick. Good thing we're experts at not blowing ourselves up," Ralston added, the mock bravado in his voice a thin veneer over genuine concern. The crew scattered to their tasks. They moved with the efficiency of people who had made a career out of dodging death, though their progress was punctuated by the occasional muttered curse or sarcastic quip. As they worked, Mira's mind drifted to the problem of contacting Earth. The wormhole collapse had been like a cosmic divorce, messy, inconvenient, and full of lingering regrets. But humanity had a knack for finding loopholes, and Mira was already scheming. "We need to talk about the distress signal," she said, glancing at Draxon over her shoulder. "What about it?" he asked, though his expression suggested he was already bracing for more bad news. "I've got a plan," Mira replied, her voice a mix of excitement and trepidation. "It involves using Glacia's magnetic fields to bounce a signal through the wormhole remains." Jenkins snorted, adjusting his headset. "That sounds like the kind of plan you come up with after a bottle of space whiskey. Hey, it's better than our current plan of doing nothing and hoping Earth magically realizes we're in trouble," Mira shot back, rolling her eyes. Draxon nodded slowly. "All right, Mira, walk us through it." Mira tapped a few keys, bringing up a schematic of Glacia's magnetic fields. "The idea is to amplify our signal using the planet's natural energy. If we can get the frequency just right, we might piggyback a message through the remnants of the wormhole." Ralston frowned. "Sounds like a long shot." "Long shots are our specialty," Draxon replied, a hint of a smile touching his lips. Jenkins was already tweaking the communication setup, his earlier skepticism giving way to a grudging interest. "It's crazy," he said, "but it just might work, like using a slingshot to hit a moving target a million miles away." "Exactly," Mira replied, her eyes alight with possibility. "And if it doesn't work, well, at least we'll have been entertaining." The crew fell into a rhythm, working to adjust the ship's systems and synchronize them with Glacia's magnetic fields. There was an air of determination, a shared resolve that transcended the usual cynicism. As they worked, the ship's systems hummed around them, a background symphony of beeps and whirs. The Resolute might have been a battered old bucket, but it was their bucket, and it had a knack for pulling through when it mattered. Draxon watched his crew, their faces etched with concentration and hope. For all their irreverence and dark humor, they were a formidable team, capable of snatching victory from the jaws of defeat with nothing more than spit, grit, and a healthy dose of sarcasm. "All right," Draxon said, his voice cutting through the chatter. "Let's give it a shot." Mira nodded, fingers flying over the console. The ship's systems responded sluggishly at first, like a grumpy old man waking from a nap, but slowly the readings began to align, the frequencies syncing with Glacia's magnetic fields. "Here goes nothing," Jenkins muttered, his eyes glued to the screen. The ship shuddered slightly as the signal was boosted, the energy coursing through the systems like a shot of adrenaline. It was a delicate balance, a dance between technology and nature, but the crew held their breath, hoping against hope. For a moment, nothing happened. It was a tense silence, the kind that stretched on for eternity, where every heartbeat felt like a countdown to disaster. Then the console beeped, a sound so sweet it could have been a symphony. Jenkins let out a whoop of triumph, the tension breaking like a wave. "We've got a signal," he shouted, his voice a mix of disbelief and joy. It worked. Draxon felt a surge of relief, a weight lifting from his shoulders. "Good work, team," he said, his voice full of the kind of pride that was usually reserved for parents at their kids' graduation. Mira grinned, her earlier tension giving way to celebration. "I knew we could do it," she said, though her voice lacked its usual sarcasm. Ralston clapped Jenkins on the back, the congratulations as awkward and genuine as the moment deserved. "See, I told you we wouldn't end up as space debris." Jenkins rolled his eyes but didn't bother to hide his smile. "Guess I owe you a drink," he said, though they both knew it was a promise unlikely to be kept anytime soon. As the crew basked in their victory, the ship hummed with the energy of a team that had managed to defy the odds once again. It was a moment of triumph, a testament to their ingenuity and resilience in the face of overwhelming adversity. The universe might have been a harsh and unforgiving place, full of cosmic dangers and unpredictable challenges, but for now, the Resolute and her crew had managed to carve out their own little corner of victory. Draxon looked around at his crew, their expressions a mix of joy and disbelief. They were survivors, fighters, dreamers, and occasionally idiots, but they were his idiots, and together they had pulled off the impossible. "Now let's hope Earth gets the message," Mira said, her voice a hopeful whisper. The crew nodded, the unspoken agreement filling the room. They had done their part, and now all they could do was wait. As they settled into the comfortable, familiar routine of waiting for the universe to respond, Draxon felt an unfamiliar sensation creeping into his consciousness. It was hope, pure and unadulterated, and it felt damn good. "To survival and all that jazz," he said, raising an imaginary glass. The crew joined in, their voices mingling in the confined space, a toast to their shared victory and the hope of better days ahead. In the end, the Resolute had lived up to its name, forging a path through the darkness with grit, determination, and a hefty dose of gallows humor. It was a story of human tenacity, a testament to the power of stubbornness and ingenuity in the face of cosmic absurdity. And though the future remained uncertain, for this moment at least, they had won. They had faced down the universe and emerged victorious, their spirits unbowed and their humor intact. In the vast expanse of space, Amidst the swirling chaos and unpredictable dangers, the Resolute and her crew remained defiant, a beacon of hope in a universe that very much seemed to have it in for them. But that was okay. They wouldn't have had it any other way. One moment, the crew of the Resolute was clinking imaginary glasses to their unexpected success, and in the next, a voice crackled over the barely functioning communication setup. It was a voice they hadn't heard in far too long, one that carried the comforting, if bureaucratic, tones of Earth Command. "Resolute, this is Earth Command. We received your signal," the voice announced, as if they weren't floating on a frozen death rock millions of miles away. The crew just stared at the console in disbelief for a second, as if waiting for the voice to follow up with a sales pitch or ask if they'd like to upgrade their current telecommunications plan. Draxon was the first to recover, tapping the comms button with a cautious optimism. "Earth Command, this is Captain Draxon. Got any good news for us, or are we just the butt of another cosmic prank?" There was a pause, likely because the poor soul on the other end was trying to decipher whether Draxon was serious or just suffering from space madness. Yes, Captain," came the reply. "We're dispatching rescue ships to your coordinates as we speak. Estimated time of arrival is 3 days. 3 days." It sounded like an eternity when surrounded by a planet trying its damnedest to flash freeze them, but it was better than the never-ending abyss of dead silence. Mira, who had taken a moment to process the news, turned in her chair with her usual flair. 3 days. What are they sending? A convoy of snails? Ralston grinned. Maybe it's just a very enthusiastic sloth. Takes its sweet time but gets there in the end. Jenkins snorted, adjusting his headset. Well, at least they are on their way. Gives us some time to tidy up the place. Can't have them thinking we're living in a pigsty. Draxon let out a long, slow breath, as if expelling all the pent-up anxiety of the past few weeks in one go. Let's not jinx it. Until we see those rescue ships with our own eyes, we're still in the thick of it. The crew turned back to their tasks with renewed vigor, the promise of rescue hanging in the air like a lifeline. Even their sarcasm took on a lighter tone, their gallows humor tinged with the first real hope they'd had in weeks. As they worked, Mira found herself reflecting on their journey. Surviving on Glacia had been like playing a high-stakes game of chess with the universe, where the rules changed every turn and the board was rigged to explode. Yet somehow, they'd managed to hold their own, adapting and improvising with that uniquely human stubbornness that refused to quit. "Hey, Draxon," Mira called over, her fingers still dancing across the console as she checked the status of the geothermal converters. "Ever think we'd make it this far?" Draxon leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Honestly, I give us a 50-50 shot at best, but I guess we've all got a little bit of cockroach in us. Hard to squash." "Speak for yourself," Jenkins chimed in, his voice dripping with mock indignation. "I happen to be more of a cat, 9 lives and all that." Ralston, who was busy ensuring that the converters wouldn't decide to throw a tantrum at the last minute, chuckled. "If we're picking animals, I call dibs on the possum. Play dead until the danger passes." The banter flowed easily among them, an unspoken acknowledgement of the bond they'd forged through shared adversity. They were more than just a crew. They were a mismatched family of sorts, bound by their collective stubbornness and sardonic humor. Glacia, for all its icy hostility, had become something of a home, not by choice but by necessity. They'd carved out a corner of survival in a universe that seemed hell-bent on making everything as difficult as possible. And despite the constant threat of freezing, quakes, and equipment malfunctions, they'd endured. "Think we'll actually miss this place?" Mira wondered aloud, half joking. "I mean, once you get past the whole trying to kill us thing, it has a certain charm." Jenkins snorted. "Sure, if you're into frozen wastelands and lethal planetary tantrums. Personally, I can't wait to kiss terra firma that isn't trying to shake me off like a bad habit." "You say that now," Ralston countered, "but just think how peaceful it'll be once the converters get this place stabilized. Glacia, vacation destination of the future." Draxon shook his head, a wry smile playing at the corners of his mouth. You know, I think some part of me will miss it. Not the freezing my ass off part, but the challenge. The sense that we did something a lot of people wouldn't have even attempted. Mira nodded, her expression thoughtful. Yeah, we made it work when all the odds said we shouldn't. Guess that counts for something. The Iors passed with surprising speed as they secured systems, double-checked the geothermal converters, and ensured everything was as stable as a planet like Glacia could possibly be. The crew moved with the efficiency of seasoned veterans, their earlier bickering replaced by a quiet camaraderie. Occasionally, one of them would crack a joke or make a sarcastic comment, but beneath the humor was a palpable sense of pride. They'd faced down an impossible situation and emerged on the other side, bruised but not broken. As the second day drew to a close, the ship's systems began to alert them to incoming signals. It was a chorus of beeps and pings, the audible confirmation that Earth's rescue ships were drawing near. Looks like our ride's almost here, Jenkins observed, his voice a mix of relief and disbelief. Hope they brought snacks. I'm sick of protein bars that taste like sawdust. Draxon grinned, the tension that had gripped him for weeks finally starting to ease. If they did, I'm claiming first dibs. Captain's privilege. Ralston mockingly saluted. Aye, aye, Captain. You can have all the mystery meat packs you want. Mira leaned back in her chair, a satisfied smile on her face. Hard to believe we're actually getting out of here. Part of me was starting to think we'd end up as the next batch of Glacia popsicles. Yeah, well, we had to make sure we went out with a bang, Jenkins replied, rolling his eyes. As the rescue ships drew closer, the crew of the Resolute gathered in the control room, their eyes fixed on the digital map displaying the incoming fleet. It was a surreal moment, the culmination of weeks of struggle and uncertainty. When the first ship appeared in orbit, its silhouette a comforting sight against the backdrop of stars, the crew erupted into a chorus of cheers and whoops. It was a celebration born of relief and vindication, a testament to their tenacity and resilience. Draxon watched his crew, a swell of pride in his chest. They'd faced insurmountable odds and come out on top, and though Glacia had done its best to leave them battered and bruised, it had also forged them into something stronger. As the rescue ships began their descent, Mira turned to Draxon with a grin. Think they'll let us keep the Resolute as a souvenir? Draxon chuckled, shaking his head. I wouldn't count on it, but hey, maybe they'll let us name a crater after her, a little memento of our time here. Jenkins raised an imaginary glass. To the Resolute, the creaky, unreliable bucket that somehow got us through. To survival, Ralston added, raising his own imaginary toast. Mira joined in, her smile as bright as the simulated daylight. And to the crew crazy enough to call this place home. As the rescue ships settled onto the planet's surface, the crew of the Resolute prepared to leave their frozen refuge. They'd conquered Glacia, not through force but with wit, grit, and a healthy dose of stubbornness. In the end, the Resolute and her crew had proven that even in the harshest conditions, humanity could endure. They'd turned the impossible into reality, surviving where others might have faltered. And though they were leaving Glacia behind, they carried its lessons with them, a reminder of their strength, their resourcefulness, and their ability to find humor in even the darkest situations. As they boarded the rescue ship, leaving their old vessel behind, Draxon took a final look at the planet that had been their unlikely home. It was a bittersweet farewell, tinged with the knowledge that they'd made it against all odds. And as the rescue ships lifted off, carrying them away from Glacia's icy grasp, Draxon couldn't help but smile. They'd survived, and they'd done it with style. Whatever the universe threw their way next, they'd be ready, armed with a little sarcasm, a lot of courage, and a willingness to defy the odds one more time.